Hello. So in this writing notes video, we're going to talk about grade norming, which is a teaching strategy that I actually learned when I came here to Penn State, and I think it's fantastic. So basically, grade norming involves giving your students examples of the type of project that you want them to do, along with the grading criteria or standards that you're using to assess the project, and then having them grade the samples so that you all can get a sense, and then you grade them as well, so that everyone can get a sense of how the grading standards work, how they're applied, and what sorts of things you're looking at when you grade their project. So I tend to do this as an activity for almost every project I have my students do, both for first-year composition classes and for business writing courses. And I do this both in the classroom and online. So I've done this in class, where I've assigned students to read. I usually do 3 samples if I can. I think that's a nice number because it gives you multiple options in terms of different models that they can use as they write their own projects, different things they can be inspired by. And it also gives you a broad enough base that you can sort of establish things that work and don't work without giving them too many samples. Because if you give them too much stuff, they get bogged down and it becomes really hard to have productive discussions about them. So I find that 3 is a really good number. So I've done this in the classroom where I will assign them to read 3 essays or look at 3 videos or listen to 3 podcasts or whatever the assignment is before class. And then we come in and I give them time in class. Usually if it's a 50-minute session, this is the main activity that we do that day. So I will give them time to go back over the assignment, and usually I have them work with partners or small groups to figure out, based on the grading criteria and the standards, what grade they would assign to each of these essays. I'm going to say essays for the sake of simplicity, but again, you could do it with video projects, you could do it with podcasts, whatever it is. But I'm going to say essays to make it a little bit easier on everyone. So this is the simplified version, and there's a slightly more complex version I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But basically, they either on their own, with partner, small group, whatever you want to have them do, or whatever they want to do, they assign each of these sample essays a letter grade. And then after that, after I have them assign those letter grades, I go through each of the essays. I put a little chart up on the board which has the essay down the side and then A, B, C, D, F along the top. And I just sort of chart what letter grade, or how many students gave each essay each letter grade. So I go through with the first essay, how many students gave it an A, I write down that number. How many students gave it a B, write down that number. How many students gave it a C, write down that number, etc., etc. So by the end, we've got a chart that shows us what the majority of students graded each of the essays. So maybe the first essay has mostly A's. It's got 20 A's and 4 B's. Maybe the second essay has 15 B's, 5 A's, and 4 C's, whatever it is. So you get that sort of grade distribution that you can visually see on the board. So that's really useful if you're in the classroom. And then typically what I try to do is actually ask a few students to explain why they gave the grades that they did. So people who gave essay 1 an A, why did you give it an A? What worked in it? And the goal here is to have students talk through the strengths and the weaknesses of these essays. So what did it do well? What could we maybe use as a model? And what did it do poorly? would we probably want to avoid with this project? So getting students to think through those issues is really, really useful for them. If you're doing this online, I tend to do this through a discussion forum. So I will put up the 3 essays, or whatever it is, and have students write out their answers. So write out the letter grade and then the reasoning behind that letter grade. Then sometimes I do this, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I will go through and I will actually correlate the responses. So I will create the same kind of chart that I did in the classroom, just I'll do it usually in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. And then I will give the grades that I would have assigned to those samples along with my rationale. So I then am doing the same kind of work that the students are doing in addition to correlating all of the grades that they've given. The one drawback, or the one sort of pitfall that I've really found with doing this online, is that the grade distribution seems to be much tighter than when you're doing it in the classroom, because the first couple of people who post their answers, what I think happens is that subsequent students, as they see, oh, that person gave this essay an A, I didn't think it was that great, but I don't want to disagree. I want to go along with what other people think, so I'll give it an A as well. And I mean, the reason I think this is because I will assign the same set of essays to multiple sections, and the section where the first person gives an essay a C is going to have a lot more people in that section giving that essay a C, whereas when the first person gives that essay a B or an A in the other section, you get a lot more people saying it's a B or an A. So I think there is a sort of going along with what other people have said. And I mean, with any sort of discussion forum where students can read the answers that other people have posted, you always have a little bit of sort of echoing. So that's one potential pitfall of doing this online, but I actually don't think it's that much of a problem, because the basic benefits of grade norming as an activity are still there. You are still getting students to read these essays, to think about what works and what doesn't work, and to consider them as models. So the other thing that I want to very briefly touch on is getting sample essays. So Penn State, where I currently work, publishes, I should have gotten this out before, publishes a reader for our first year composition course. This is last year's reader. The reader is called Penn Statements, but it is a collection of sample essays published by or written by students in the class that are then sent into the program in Writing and Rhetoric, which is the sort of sub-department of the English department that houses first-year composition, business writing, technical writing, and things like this. So students send their essays in, and then PWR publishes this book. And so that's a really useful tool for grade norming, because you have sets of essays shaped for the particular assignments that students are doing, or similar to the particular assignments that students are doing. So if you're teaching in a program that has something like that, that's a tremendous resource. If you're not, what I typically do, and I do this for my business writing classes because we don't have an equivalent to Penn Statements for the business writing classes. So what I tend to do is use sample essays from previous semesters. Now, the thing that I would tell you to do with this is to get students signed permission to do that and take their names off it, take the grade off it. Obviously, if you're grade norming, you want to take the grade off it. But I would say take the student's name off of it and get their permission. I actually have permission slips that I hand out at the end of every semester, basically just saying the student gives me or the English department permission to use their work as samples in classes or teaching portfolio stuff, whatever it is. So I have files of those in my office at the university, just files of permission slips. So that's what I would suggest doing. I think if you take the student's name and grade off of it, you're not necessarily violating FERPA, even if you don't have their written permission, but I would be very cautious about distributing a student's work without having permission from them to do so. So that's what I would suggest, is just if you don't have those permissions, I would say start getting them if this is a course that you're going to teach again and again. So that's typically what I do, is I either use the resources that Penn State has for me, and your university might have different types of resources. They might have collections of sample essays that you could use for this type of activity. Or I use essays from previous semesters when I've got the student's permission. And again, the grade norming activity is really, really useful. Again, it gives students a sense of what goes into grading. It gives students a sense of what your expectations are for this project. It gives students additional models for what they could do in their own projects.